Lightning cracked across the sky, and Elena Marsh ran. Her bare feet tore against frozen ground, her breath coming in white gasps that vanished into the dark. Behind her, far off but not far enough, she could hear voices shouting her name, and the sound of that shouting was worse than the cold, worse than the rain soaking through her thin coat, worse than anything she had felt in years. She did not look back. Looking back had never once helped her. The trees around her blurred into black shapes, and thorns caught at her ankles as she pushed through a wall of brush. Somewhere behind that brush was a fence, tall and iron, and beyond the fence was land that did not belong to her old pack. She had heard stories about what lay past that fence. Some called it the safest place in the region. Others called it cursed, ruled by a man who had buried his own mate and never smiled since. Elena did not care which story was true. She only cared that it was not her old home, and that was enough. Her hand found the iron bars just as her legs gave out beneath her. She gripped the fence, gasping, and for a moment she thought she might simply lie down in the mud and let the storm take her. It would have been easier. She had been running for 3 days, sleeping in ditches, eating what she could find in the frost-covered forest, and every part of her body screamed to stop. But stopping meant being found, and being found meant going back, and going back meant facing the punishment her own pack had promised her for a crime she never committed. So she pulled herself up. She had barely climbed halfway over the fence when the lights hit her. Bright, sudden, blinding. She froze, one leg dangling over the iron bars, her whole body lit up like a target. Voices called out in sharp, commanding tones, and within seconds, she was surrounded by guards in dark uniforms, their eyes glowing faintly gold in the night, a mark of their wolf blood rising close to the surface. "Don't move!" one of them ordered. Elena did not have the strength to argue. She let herself drop from the fence, landing hard on the wet grass on the other side, and raised her shaking hands. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need somewhere to stop. Just for tonight." The guards exchanged a look. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair at his temples, stepped closer and studied her with narrowed eyes. He took in her torn clothes, the bruises across her arms, the way her whole body trembled from cold and exhaustion. "You crossed onto Cade land," he said slowly. "Do you understand whose territory this is?" She nodded. She had heard the name Cade whispered with a strange mixture of fear and respect. The Alpha King. The man who ruled more territory than any other pack leader in the region, whose word was law, from the northern rivers to the southern hills. "I have nowhere else to go," she said, and this time her voice did not shake. It simply broke, quiet and honest, the truth finally escaping after days of holding it in. "I have nowhere to go." The guard studied her a moment longer, then sighed and lowered his weapon. "Take her inside," he said to the others. "Let the Alpha decide what to do with her." They did not treat her gently, but they did not hurt her either. 2 guards flanked her on either side, as they marched her up a long gravel road toward a mansion that rose out of the darkness like something from an old story, its stone walls climbing 3 floors high, its windows glowing with warm light against the storm. Elena had never seen a home so large. She had grown up in a small pack with barely enough rooms for its own members, and the sight of the Cade estate made her feel smaller than she already did. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wall, and for a moment she nearly collapsed from the sudden relief of it. A woman in a neat gray dress rushed forward, her expression a mixture of alarm and curiosity, but the guards waved her back. "The Alpha needs to see this one first," the older guard said. They led her through a hallway lined with tall windows, past portraits of stern-faced men and women, who Elena assumed were past leaders of the Cade line, until they reached a set of heavy wooden doors. The guard knocked twice, then pushed them open without waiting for an answer. The room beyond was a study, dimly lit, with a fire crackling in a massive stone hearth. And there, standing near the window with his back to the door, was a man Elena knew instantly must be the Alpha King. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed simply in a dark shirt, with sleeves pushed up over forearms, that looked like they had done hard work more than once in their life. His dark hair was slightly too long, falling over his forehead, and even from behind, there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of exhaustion, carried for a very long time. "Alpha," the guard said, "we found her at the northern fence. Says she has nowhere to go. The man at the window did not turn around right away. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the crackling fire and the rain against the glass. Then he turned. Elena had expected many things. She had expected anger, or suspicion, or the cold dismissal she had received from every stranger she had approached over the last 3 days. What she had not expected was the way his dark eyes settled on her and simply studied her, quiet and unreadable, as if he were looking for something specific and trying to decide whether he had found it. "Leave us," he said to the guards. They hesitated. "Alpha, we don't know who she is." I said, "Leave us." The guards exchanged another look, but they obeyed, filing out and shutting the doors behind them with a heavy click. Elena was left alone in the study, with a man whose reputation stretched across the entire region, and she had never felt more exposed in her life. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. She did not move. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and some deep, cautious part of her did not trust an offer of comfort from a stranger, no matter how gently it was given. He seemed to understand. He did not push. Instead, he crossed the room and sat in the chair across from the one he had offered her, giving her space, giving her the choice. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena," she said. "Elena Marsh." "And where do you come from, Elena Marsh?" She hesitated. Saying the name of her old pack out loud felt dangerous, as if speaking it might summon them through the storm outside. But something about the steadiness in his voice, the way he waited without impatience, made her feel that lying would be a mistake. "The Ashwood pack," she said quietly, "to the east." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, a flicker of recognition. "I know of them," he said. "I did not know they were in the habit of losing their people to the woods in the middle of a storm." "They didn't lose me," Elena said, and to her own surprise, her voice hardened. "They cast me out." "For what reason?" She looked down at her hands, at the dirt and dried blood under her nails from days of scrambling through the forest. "It doesn't matter," she said. "No one believed me then. I don't expect a stranger to believe me now." He was quiet for a long moment, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he asked the question that would change everything. "Where will you go if I turn you away tonight?" And that was when the truth simply came out of her, unguarded, more honest than anything she had said in years. "I don't know," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go." The fire popped and crackled in the silence that followed. The Alpha King leaned back in his chair, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he has been turning over for a very long time, searching for the one piece that might finally make it whole. "Good," he said at last. Elena blinked, certain she had misheard him. "Good?" "My children need a guardian," he said simply, as if that explained everything, as if the word "good" had been the most natural response in the world to a stranger admitting she had nowhere left to turn. She stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for the catch, because surely there was a catch. Men like him did not offer shelter to strangers out of kindness alone, but he only watched her, patient, unmoving, as if the offer was exactly as simple as it sounded. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "I have 4 children," he said. "And in the past 3 years, I have gone through 11 guardians for them. Every single one has left. Some quit within a week. One ran from this house in the middle of the night and never came back for her belongings." His jaw tightened, just slightly, the first real crack Elena had seen in his composure. "My children are difficult, they are grieving, and they are angry, and they do not trust easily. I need someone who will not run at the first sign of trouble. Someone with nowhere else to go might be exactly the kind of person who stays." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You want to use my situation against me. I want to offer you a trade," he corrected. "A roof, food, safety from whatever it is you are running from tonight. In exchange, you look after my children, and do not abandon them the way everyone else has." It should have felt insulting, being offered shelter as if she were a solution to a problem rather than a person. But there was something underneath his words that Elena recognized, something raw that he was trying very hard to keep hidden. This was not a man asking a favor. This was a man who had run out of options and was, in his own guarded way, admitting it. "Why me?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me. I know you climbed a fence in a storm, rather than go back to wherever you came from," he said. I know you didn't lie to me when it would have been easier. That tells me more than most references would." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold and tired and hollowed out she still felt, even here, even in this warm room with its crackling fire. She thought of the days ahead if she refused this offer, wandering, hiding, waiting for her old pack to catch up with her, because packs like the Ashwood did not simply let their targets disappear into the night. They hunted. They always hunted. "What happened to their mother?" she asked quietly. The Alpha King's expression shuddered instantly, the warmth in the room seeming to dim along with it. "She died," he said. 3 years ago. That is all you need to know for tonight." Elena understood the boundary in his tone, and did not push against it. She had her own locked doors, her own rooms she did not let anyone else walk into. It felt only fair to respect his. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "what happens if I fail? What happens if I become guardian number 12 who runs?" For the first time, something almost like the ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, though it did not reach his eyes. "Then you will have at least had a roof over your head for longer than you would have had wandering the forest tonight," he said. "I am not asking for a promise you cannot keep. I am asking you to try." Elena looked at the fire, at the shifting orange light dancing across the stone hearth, and thought about everything she had lost in the last 3 days. Her home, her reputation, the people she had once called family, who had turned their backs on her the moment a lie was more convenient than the truth. She had nothing left to protect, no reputation left to guard, no home left to lose. Maybe that made her exactly the kind of person who could walk into a house full of grieving, difficult children and simply stay, because staying was the only direction left for her to go. "All right," she said. "I'll try." Something shifted in the Alpha King's shoulders, a tension she had not noticed until it eased. He stood, and for the first time, he offered her his hand. "Damien Cade," he said. "Welcome to my home, Elena Marsh. I hope you last longer than the others." She took his hand, and even through her exhaustion, she felt a strange jolt at the contact, warm and unfamiliar, gone as quickly as it came. She told herself it meant nothing. She was cold and tired, and half out of her mind from 3 days of running. Any warmth would have felt strange against her frozen skin. "I intend to," she said. He studied her for a moment longer, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes, and then he called for the woman in the gray dress, who appeared so quickly Elena suspected she had been waiting just outside the door the entire time. "Get her a room," Damien said. "Warm food, dry clothes, and let her sleep. She meets the children in the morning." The woman, whose name Elena would later learn was Greta, looked her over with open curiosity, but said nothing beyond a polite nod. She led Elena out of the study and up a wide staircase, and as they walked, Elena glanced back once toward the closed doors of the study, wondering what kind of man offered shelter to a stranger in the middle of a storm and called it good. She did not yet know that behind those doors, Damien Cade was still standing by the fire, staring into the flames, turning over a strange and unfamiliar feeling in his chest that he had not felt in 3 long years. He did not have a word for it yet. He only knew that something about the exhausted, defiant woman who had climbed his fence in the storm had reached a part of him he thought had gone cold forever. Upstairs, Greta showed Elena to a small but comfortable room with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the dark forest. She brought a tray of warm soup and bread, along with a set of dry clothes that smelled faintly of lavender, and left Elena alone to eat and change and finally rest. Elena sat on the edge of the bed long after the food was gone, staring at her own hands in the lamplight, hardly able to believe the turn her night had taken. Hours ago she had been certain she would either be caught by her old pack or die of cold in the forest. Now she was warm, fed, and sheltered in the home of the most powerful alpha in the region, tasked with caring for 4 children she had not yet met. She did not know what kind of family she had just stepped into. She did not know about the grief that lived in every room of this house, or the 4 small wolves upstairs who had learned that trust only ever led to disappointment, or the 11 guardians before her who had come and gone like ghosts through a house that refused to heal. She only knew that for the first time in 3 days, she was not running. Outside, the storm slowly began to ease, the thunder rolling farther and farther into the distance, until at last the rain softened into a quiet patter against the window, and Elena, despite everything, finally allowed herself to sleep. In the morning, everything would change again. But for tonight, she had a roof over her head. And that was more than she had dared to hope for when she first climbed that iron fence with nothing left to lose. She did not yet know that somewhere down the hall, behind a door with 4 small handprints painted across it in faded colors, 4 children lay awake in their beds, having heard the guards return, having heard the whispers among the staff that a new guardian had arrived. They had heard it 11 times before. 11 times they had watched a stranger walk through their front door promising to stay. 11 times they had watched that stranger break the promise and leave. They did not believe in promises anymore. And they intended to make very sure that Elena Marsh understood that, the very first chance they got. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Cade estate, and Elena woke with a start, unsure for a moment where she was. The soft mattress beneath her, the warm blankets, the absence of cold mud and rain, all felt foreign after 3 days of running. Then the memory returned in a rush, the storm, the fence, the Alpha King's steady voice offering her a place to stay, and she sat up quickly, heart pounding with a strange mixture of relief and fear. She washed and dressed in the clothes Greta had left for her, simple and practical, and made her way downstairs, following the smell of fresh bread through the wide halls of the mansion. The house looked different in daylight, less like a fortress and more like a home that had once been full of warmth, though something in its quiet halls suggested that warmth had long since faded. She found Damien in a large dining room, seated at the head of a long table, a cup of coffee in front of him, and a stack of papers he was not really reading. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, his dark eyes studied her the same way they had the night before, careful and assessing. "You slept," he said. It was not quite a question. "I did," Elena answered. "Thank you for the room. And the food." He nodded once, then set down his papers entirely, giving her his full attention, in a way that made her feel strangely exposed. "Before you meet them," he said, "I want to be honest with you about what you are walking into." Elena took the seat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm listening." "My children are not simply difficult," Damien said, choosing his words with obvious care. "They are grieving. Their mother died protecting this territory from an attack 3 years ago, and since then, they have struggled to trust anyone who comes into this house claiming they will stay." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The youngest, Tobias, has not spoken a single word since the day she died. The twins, Ivy and Milo, act out in ways that most guardians cannot manage, and the eldest, Ren, has taken it upon herself to protect her siblings from anyone she believes might hurt them, which in her mind includes every guardian who has ever walked through that door." Elena absorbed this quietly. "How old are they?" "Ren is 9, the twins are 6, Tobias just turned 3. He rubbed a hand across his face, and for the first time, Elena saw the full weight of exhaustion carved into his features, the kind of tiredness that came from years of trying and failing to fix something that could not simply be fixed. "I am the alpha of this territory. I manage disputes between packs. I keep peace across hundreds of miles of land, and I cannot get my own children to trust a single person I bring into this house." "Including you?" Elena asked gently. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and surprised, as if the question had struck somewhere tender. He did not answer right away. "I am gone more than I am here," he admitted finally. "Duties that cannot wait. I tell myself it is necessary, and it is, but I know it has cost me time with them that I cannot get back." Elena thought of her own childhood, the years spent longing for a parent's attention that never quite arrived, and something in her chest softened toward this tired, guarded man, in a way she had not expected. "I won't promise you I'll succeed where 11 others failed," she said honestly. "But I won't leave because it's hard. I've had hard before. I know how to sit with it." Something shifted behind Damien's eyes, something that looked almost like hope, though he masked it quickly beneath his usual composure. "Then let's not waste the morning," he said, standing. "Come, meet them." He led her up the wide staircase, and down a long hallway, toward a set of doors, painted with faded handprints in different colors, clearly done by small hands years ago, and never repainted. Damien knocked twice before pushing the door open. The playroom beyond was large and bright, filled with toys scattered across the floor, though something about the scene felt less like play, and more like chaos barely contained. A young girl with dark hair pulled back in a messy braid sat cross-legged near the window, arms folded, watching the door with sharp, suspicious eyes the moment it opened. Two smaller children, a boy and a girl who were clearly twins, were in the middle of what looked like a fight over a wooden block, both pulling at it with equal determination. And in the corner, a small boy with tousled brown hair sat alone, quietly stacking blocks into a tower, his eyes fixed on his hands, not looking up at all. "Children," Damien said, his voice gentler than Elena had yet heard it. "This is Elena. She's going to be staying with us." The twins stopped fighting over the block, just long enough to glance at Elena, sizing her up with open curiosity, before returning to their tug-of-war. But the girl by the window, Ren, rose slowly to her feet, her expression hardening into something far older than 9 years should have carried. "How long will you last?" Ren asked, her voice flat and unimpressed. Rosa lasted 3 days. Beth lasted a week. The one before that left in the middle of the night without even saying goodbye. "Ren," Damien said, a note of warning in his tone. "It's a fair question, Papa." Ren crossed her arms, staring Elena down with a bravery that struck Elena as both impressive and heartbreaking in a child so young. "We don't need someone who's going to leave. We're fine without a guardian. I take care of them." Elena crouched down slightly, bringing herself closer to Ren's eye level, careful not to move too fast, the same way she might approach a nervous animal. "I'm not going to make you a promise you don't believe," she said quietly. "Promises haven't meant much to you lately, have they?" Ren's expression flickered, surprise breaking briefly through her guarded mask before she caught herself. "No," she admitted grudgingly, "they haven't." "Then I won't give you one," Elena said. "I'll just be here, every day, and you can decide for yourself, over time, whether that means something." Ren studied her for a long moment, clearly unsure what to make of an answer that did not fit the pattern she had grown used to. Behind her, the twins had finally settled their dispute over the block, apparently losing interest in the fight the moment Elena stopped watching them, and the wooden block lay forgotten on the floor between them. Elena turned her attention to the quiet boy in the corner, the one who had not looked up once since she entered the room. "And you must be Tobias," she said softly, keeping her voice light and unthreatening. Tobias did not answer. He did not even glance up. He simply continued stacking his blocks, one on top of another, his small hands moving with careful, practiced precision, as if the tower was the only thing in the world that mattered. "He doesn't talk," one of the twins offered helpfully, apparently the boy, judging by his slightly shorter haircut. "Not since Mama." "Milo," Ren snapped, though her tone lacked real heat, more habit than anger. "It's true," the little girl twin added, unbothered by her sister's scolding. "I'm Ivy, by the way. That's Milo. We're the same, but we're not actually the same. Everyone always gets confused." Despite the tension in the room, Elena felt the corner of her mouth lift slightly at Ivy's matter-of-fact introduction. "I'll try to remember," she said. "Ivy has the shorter hair, and Milo has the gap in his front teeth. Is that right?" Ivy blinked, clearly startled that Elena had already picked up on the difference after only a few seconds. "That's right," she said, sounding almost impressed despite herself. Damien, watching from the doorway, said nothing, but Elena caught the way his shoulders had eased slightly, the way his eyes moved between his children and her, with something unreadable, but no longer entirely guarded. "I'll leave you to get acquainted," he said finally. "Elena, Greta can show you the rest of the house whenever you're ready. I have matters to attend to this morning, but I will be back before evening." "Of course," Elena said. As Damien turned to leave, Ren's voice cut through the room again, quieter this time, almost too quiet to hear. "Papa." He paused in the doorway, looking back at his daughter. "You always say that," Ren said, "back before evening. And then it's always later than you said." Something passed across Damien's face, guilt and exhaustion tangled together, and for a moment Elena saw, not the powerful Alpha King who ruled hundreds of miles of territory, but simply a father who knew he was failing his children and did not know how to stop. "I'll try," he said quietly, and then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Ren watched the empty doorway for a long moment before turning back to Elena, her guarded expression settling firmly back into place, as if the brief crack in her armor had never happened at all. "You'll leave too," she said, not unkindly, simply stating what she believed to be an unavoidable fact. "Everyone does eventually. Elena held the girl's gaze steadily. Maybe, she admitted, but not today, and not because it got hard. Ren did not respond to that, but she also did not walk away, which Elena decided to count as a small victory. Behind her, the twins had already returned to their games, apparently satisfied that the newcomer was not an immediate threat, their earlier suspicion forgotten as quickly as it had come. Only Tobias remained unmoved, silent, and focused entirely on his tower of blocks, as if the rest of the room did not exist for him at all. Elena settled onto the floor near him, not too close, simply present, and picked up a stray block from the pile beside her, turning it over in her hands. "Do you mind if I build with you?" she asked quietly, not expecting an answer, and not needing one. Tobias did not look up, but he also did not move away. And when Elena carefully placed her block at the base of a new, small tower beside his, he paused for just a moment, glancing sideways at what she had done, before returning to his own work. It was not much. It was barely anything at all, really. A boy quietly noticing a stranger's block on the floor beside his own. But Elena had learned enough about grief and guarded hearts in her own life to recognize a small opening when she saw one, and she intended to be patient enough to wait for whatever came next. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the Cade estate, and somewhere in the house, an old grandfather clock chimed the hour, marking the true beginning of Elena's strange new life among a family of wolves who had forgotten how to trust, and a king who had forgotten how to hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Elena had not expected to find so quickly, though it was not an easy one. Mornings began before sunrise, with Tobias often waking from restless sleep and needing quiet company, until the fear in his small body eased enough for him to settle again. Elena learned to sit beside his bed without speaking, humming softly under her breath, until his breathing slowed and his eyes finally closed. Ren remained the hardest to reach. She watched Elena's every move with the sharp, unblinking attention of someone who had learned that adults could not be trusted to keep their word, and she made it clear, in small ways every single day, that she was waiting for Elena to prove herself no different from the 11 who came before. One morning, less than a week into her stay, Elena found Ren in the kitchen, long before the rest of the house had woken, standing on a stool to reach the high cabinet where the flour was kept, clearly attempting to make breakfast for her younger siblings on her own. "You don't need to do that," Elena said gently, stepping into the room. Ren startled, nearly losing her balance on the stool, and turned with a defensive glare already forming. "I always make breakfast," she said. "Someone has to, and it's usually me." "Not this morning," Elena said. "Come down from there before you fall." Ren hesitated, clearly torn between her habit of taking charge and the unfamiliar experience of being told she did not have to. Slowly, she climbed down, watching warily as Elena moved to the counter and began pulling out eggs and bread with practiced ease. "You don't have to make breakfast," Elena said again, cracking an egg into a bowl. "That's my job now, not yours. You're 9. You should be doing 9-year-old things, not raising your brother and sister." "Someone has to," Ren repeated, quieter this time, some of the fight going out of her voice. "I know," Elena said, "and for a long time, that someone was you, because there wasn't anyone else. But I'm here now. You don't have to carry that anymore." Ren said nothing, but she did not leave the kitchen either. She climbed onto one of the stools at the counter and watched Elena cook in silence, her expression unreadable, though something in her shoulders had loosened just slightly, as if a weight she had been carrying for a very long time had shifted, even if only a little. By the time the twins came thundering down the stairs, arguing loudly about whose turn it was to choose a game, breakfast was ready, and Ren, to Elena's quiet surprise, helped set the table without being asked. The twins, Ivy and Milo, were easier to win over, though they came with their own particular kind of chaos. They tested boundaries constantly, not out of cruelty, Elena quickly realized, but out of a desperate need to know whether anyone would actually enforce a rule, whether anyone cared enough to notice when they misbehaved. When Elena calmly but firmly held a boundary, taking away a toy after repeated warnings, sending them to sit quietly after a fight that turned too rough, she watched something like relief flicker behind their eyes, as if being told no by someone who stayed to see the consequences through was a kind of comfort they had been missing. "You didn't yell," Milo said one afternoon, after Elena had taken away his favorite toy for throwing it at his sister. He said it almost accusingly, as if her calm had confused him. "Should I have?" Elena asked. Milo shrugged, kicking at the floor with his shoe. "Rosa used to yell. Then she'd give it back anyway because she felt bad." "I'm not going to do that," Elena said. "If I take something away, it's because you need to learn something, not because I'm angry. You'll get it back tomorrow, once you've had time to think about why it happened." Milo studied her for a long moment, clearly trying to work out whether this was some kind of trick. When Elena did, in fact, return the toy the following day, exactly as promised, something shifted in the way he looked at her, a small but real crack in his guarded expectations. Tobias remained the most difficult and the most quietly heartbreaking. He did not speak, not one word, not even a whisper. But Elena began to notice the small ways he communicated instead. He would tug gently at her sleeve when he wanted her attention. He would push his plate slightly toward her when he did not want to finish his food, waiting to see if she would understand without him needing to explain. And every night, without fail, he needed her to sit beside his bed until he fell asleep, his small hand sometimes finding hers in the dark and holding on with surprising strength for someone so young. Elena never pushed him to speak. She had learned, through her own painful history, that grief did not respond well to pressure, that healing came in its own time, on its own terms, and that the kindest thing she could offer him was patience without expectation. Damien, true to Ren's earlier warning, was often gone long past the hour he promised to return, his duties as alpha pulling him into meetings and disputes that stretched late into the evening. But when he was home, Elena noticed him watching his children with a kind of quiet hunger, as if he wanted desperately to be part of the small, ordinary moments unfolding in his own house, but did not know how to step into them after so long standing apart. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Elena's arrival, she found him standing just outside the playroom doorway, watching silently as Ivy and Milo argued over a board game, while Ren tried, with limited success, to referee the dispute, and Tobias sat quietly nearby, stacking blocks as he always did. "You could go in," Elena said softly, coming to stand beside him. Damien did not look at her, his eyes fixed on the scene inside the room. "I don't know how anymore," he admitted, so quietly she almost did not catch the words. "Every time I try, I feel like an intruder in my own home." "They're not going to bite," Elena said gently. "They just need you to try, even if it feels awkward at first." He was quiet for a long moment, and Elena thought perhaps she had overstepped, offering advice on a matter that was not truly hers to weigh in on. But then, to her surprise, he squared his shoulders and stepped into the room. The twins fell silent immediately, both of them turning to stare at their father with wide, startled eyes, as if his presence in the middle of the afternoon was as unexpected as snow in summer. Ren's expression grew guarded, watchful, clearly bracing herself for him to say he could not stay long, that duty called him elsewhere as it always did. "Can I play?" Damien asked instead, his voice slightly rough, as if the words did not come easily. For a moment, no one answered. Then Ivy, apparently deciding the matter required no further deliberation, shoved the game board toward him. "You can be blue," she announced. "Blue always loses anyway, so it's fair." A small, surprised sound escaped Damien, something that was almost a laugh, rusty from disuse. He lowered himself onto the floor beside his children, folding his large frame awkwardly into the small space, and Elena watched from the doorway as something in the room shifted, warmed, softened just slightly around the edges. Even Tobias looked up from his blocks, watching his father with quiet, careful attention, though he did not move closer, not yet. Elena did not join them. This moment belonged to Damien and his children, not to her, and she understood instinctively that some healing needed space to happen without an audience. But she lingered a moment longer in the doorway, watching the Alpha King fumble through a children's board game with genuine clumsy effort, and felt something warm and unfamiliar stir in her own chest, something she was not yet ready to name. Later that night, after the children were finally settled and the house had gone quiet, Elena found Damien in the study again, standing by the same window where she had first seen him, though this time his posture seemed less burdened, less closed off. "Thank you," he said, without turning around, clearly having heard her approach. "I didn't do anything," Elena said. "You're the one who walked into that room." "I wouldn't have," If you hadn't pushed, he said, finally turning to face her. In the firelight, his expression was open in a way she had not yet seen, something almost vulnerable beneath the usual composure. It's been a long time since I felt like I belonged in that room with them. Longer than I'd like to admit. You do belong there, Elena said. They just need to see it more often. Consistency matters more to grieving children than grand gestures. Small moments, repeated, mean more than one perfect day. Damien studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful and quiet passing behind his dark eyes. You speak like someone who understands grief from the inside, he said. Not just from watching my children carry it. Elena's smile faded slightly, an old ache surfacing at his words. I lost my parents when I was young, she admitted. Different circumstances than your children, but the same kind of hollow feeling afterward. I know what it's like to wait for someone to prove they'll actually stay. And did someone? Damien asked quietly. Stay, I mean. Elena hesitated, memories of her old pack rising unbidden, the family who had raised her only to cast her aside the moment it became convenient. Not really, she admitted. Which is probably why I understand your children better than most guardians would. Something in Damien's expression shifted, a mixture of sympathy and something else. Something warmer that he seemed to catch himself feeling, and quickly reined back in. Then I am glad you climbed that fence, he said simply. Whatever brought you here, I am glad it did. Elena did not have a response ready for the quiet sincerity in his voice, and for a moment, the two of them simply stood in comfortable silence, the fire crackling softly between them, the weight of the day settling into something almost peaceful. She did not yet know how much harder the days ahead would become, or how much closer she and Damien would grow, before old dangers finally caught up with her. For tonight, it was enough to know that somewhere upstairs, 4 children were sleeping a little more soundly than they had in a very long time, and that she, for the first time in years, finally felt like she had found somewhere worth staying. Weeks passed, and the house that had once felt so heavy with silence began, slowly, to fill with sound again. Laughter echoed down the halls more often. Arguments between the twins grew shorter and less bitter, and even Wren's guarded shoulders seemed to soften a little more each day, though she still watched Elena carefully, as if waiting for the moment the pattern would repeat itself, and this guardian too would vanish without warning. Elena did not mind the watching. She understood it. Trust built slowly for children who had learned that it could be taken away without notice, and she had promised herself she would not rush what needed time. It was on an ordinary afternoon, while Elena was helping Ivy braid a length of ribbon into her hair, that the first real sign of danger arrived at the edges of the Cade estate. A guard burst into the sitting room, breathless, his expression tight with urgency. Elena Marsh, he said, the Alpha requests you in his study. Immediately, Elena's stomach dropped. In the weeks she had lived in this house, Damien had never once summoned her with such urgency, and something in the guard's tone told her this was not a small matter. Stay here with Wren, she told Ivy gently, handing off the ribbon before hurrying from the room. She found Damien in his study, his expression darker than she had ever seen it, standing across from a man she did not recognize, dressed in colors that did not belong to the Cade pack. The stranger's eyes flicked to her the moment she entered, and something cold and calculating passed behind them. There she is, the stranger said. Elena Marsh, we've been looking for you. Elena's blood ran cold. She recognized the crest, stitched into his jacket now, the mark of the Ashwood pack, the family that had cast her out into the storm weeks ago. What is the meaning of this? Damien demanded, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made the room feel smaller. This woman is a fugitive of the Ashwood pack, the stranger said, straightening with false confidence. She stands accused of betraying pack secrets to a rival territory. Alpha Cade, we ask that you return her to face judgment. That's a lie, Elena said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to steady it. I never betrayed anyone. I was framed, and you know it. The stranger's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Damien stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Elena, a silent but unmistakable gesture of protection. She is under my roof, Damien said, his voice low and dangerous, in a way Elena had not heard from him before. And I do not hand over members of my household on the word of a stranger, with an unproven accusation. With respect, Alpha Cade, the man said, though his tone carried none. This is a matter for the Ashwood pack, not yours. It became my matter the moment she crossed my fence, Damien said. If your pack has evidence of wrongdoing, present it through proper channels. Until then, she stays here, under my protection. The stranger's jaw tightened, clearly unhappy with the response, but even he seemed to understand the weight of Damien's authority in this territory. This will not be the last you hear of this, he said, before turning and striding from the room, leaving a heavy, uneasy silence behind him. Elena's legs felt weak, and she sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling in her lap. They found me, she whispered. I knew they would eventually, but I didn't think it would be so soon. Damien knelt in front of her, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Tell me what really happened, he said gently. Not the version you gave me that first night, all of it. Elena hesitated, old wounds rising close to the surface, but something about the steady patience in his expression made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that the truth might actually be believed. There was a dispute between our pack and a neighboring territory, she said slowly. Information leaked, details about our defenses, and it caused real harm. People were hurt. The pack needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. I was unmated, without strong family ties to protect me, and I had once been seen speaking with someone from the rival pack, a friend from childhood, nothing more. That was enough for them to decide I was guilty. Did you speak to anyone about the pack's defenses? Damien asked. Never, Elena said firmly. I would never betray my own people, no matter how badly they eventually treated me. But no one wanted to hear that. It was easier to punish someone than to admit the real leak came from within their own trusted circle. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp with thought. I believe you, he said finally. Elena looked up at him, startled by the simple certainty in his voice. You don't even know me that well, she said. I know enough, Damien said. I have spent years learning to read liars in negotiations far more dangerous than this. You have never once wavered when you spoke of your innocence, even when it would have been easier to simply agree and move past the subject. Liars grow tired of maintaining a story. You have not, because it is the truth. Something in Elena's chest loosened at his words, a tension she had carried for weeks finally easing, if only slightly. Thank you, she whispered. I intend to look into this properly, Damien said, standing and beginning to pace, his mind clearly already working through the problem. If the real culprit behind that information leak is still within the Ashwood pack, they will not stop hunting you simply because I turned away one messenger. I will need to send someone to investigate quietly, someone I trust. You would do that for me? Elena asked, surprised by the offer. Damien paused his pacing and looked at her directly. You have spent weeks in this house, doing more for my children than 11 guardians managed in 3 years combined, he said. The least I can do is make sure you are not punished for a crime you did not commit. Elena did not know how to respond to the quiet sincerity in his voice, so she said nothing at all, simply holding his gaze across the small distance between them, aware of a warmth building in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude alone. That evening, after the children were settled, Elena found herself unable to sleep, her mind circling the confrontation with the Ashwood messenger. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and made her way to the small balcony outside her room, staring out at the dark forest beyond the estate, the same forest she had run through weeks ago in the storm. She did not hear Damien approach until he was standing beside her at the railing, his own expression thoughtful as he looked out over the grounds. Can't sleep either? He asked. Too much on my mind, Elena admitted. They stood together in silence for a while, the night air cool and quiet around them, and Elena found the silence oddly comforting rather than awkward, as if his presence beside her was simply another kind of shelter. I meant what I said earlier, Damien said finally. I will find the truth of what happened to you. You do not deserve to spend the rest of your life running from a lie. Why does it matter so much to you? Elena asked, genuinely curious. A month ago, you didn't know I existed. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were choosing his words carefully. Because my children trust you, he said finally. Because my house feels different since you arrived. Warmer, somehow, in a way I had given up hoping it would ever feel again. And because, he paused, glancing at her with an expression she could not quite read in the dim light, Because I find that I do not want you to leave, whatever the reason might be. Elena's breath caught in her throat, the honesty in his words settling over her like something fragile and unexpected. She did not know how to respond, so she simply let the silence stretch between them, comfortable and charged all at once. Two people standing at the edge of something neither was quite ready to name. Get some rest, Damien said finally, stepping back from the railing. Tomorrow I will begin looking into your case properly. Whatever it takes, Elena, I intend to see this resolved. He left her alone on the balcony, and Elena stood there a while longer, watching the dark line of trees at the edge of the property, thinking of the storm that had brought her here, and the strange, unexpected warmth that had grown in its wake. She did not know yet how deep the danger from her old pack truly ran, or how much it would test the fragile trust she had built in this house. But for the first time since she had been cast out into the cold, she did not feel entirely alone in facing it. The days that followed the confrontation with the Ashwood messenger brought a new kind of tension to the estate, though Elena did her best not to let it show in front of the children. Damien had sent two of his most trusted scouts east, quietly gathering information about the leak that had led to Elena's exile, and every evening he returned from his duties with the same question in his eyes, waiting for news that had not yet arrived. Despite the uncertainty hanging over her, Elena found that the small, ordinary rhythms of the household continued, and it was in those rhythms that the real progress happened, quiet and unhurried, the kind of healing that could not be rushed no matter how much anyone wished it could. It began with a small drawing. Elena was in the playroom one afternoon, helping Ivy and Milo build an elaborate tower out of wooden blocks, when Tobias, who usually kept to himself in the corner, shuffled over and set a piece of paper down in front of her without a word. Elena looked down at the drawing, simple and childlike, two stick figures standing beneath a sun, one clearly meant to be her, with her long dark hair, and the other unmistakably him, small and standing close beside her, their stick hands connected by a single line. Her throat tightened with emotion she had not expected. "Is this us?" she asked softly. Tobias nodded, just once, his eyes not quite meeting hers, but not avoiding her either. A small step forward that felt enormous, given how far he usually kept himself from any kind of connection. "I love it," Elena said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "Can I keep it?" Another small nod, and then, astonishingly, the faintest ghost of a smile crossed his face before he retreated back to his corner, as if the effort of the exchange had used up all the courage he had to give for one day. Elena kept the drawing pinned above her bed that night, staring at it long after the house had gone quiet, feeling something in her chest swell with a fierce, protective warmth she had not expected to feel so quickly, for children who were not her own. Wren's progress came more slowly, and in stranger, quieter ways. Elena noticed it first in small gestures, the way Wren began leaving her bedroom door slightly open at night instead of locked, the way she started asking Elena's opinion on small decisions, instead of making every choice unilaterally for her younger siblings. The real breakthrough came on a rainy afternoon, when a sudden clap of thunder sent Ivy and Milo scrambling for cover, both of them startled into tears by the loud noise. Elena gathered them close instinctively, humming softly as she had learned to do for Tobias, and it was only after the storm passed that she noticed Wren standing quietly in the doorway, watching the scene with an expression Elena had never seen on her before, something soft and unguarded. "You're good at this," Wren said quietly, once the twins had settled and wandered off to resume their games. "At what?" Elena asked. "Making them feel safe," Wren said. She hesitated, twisting her hands together in a nervous gesture, so unlike her usual composed defiance. "I used to do that, before. When they got scared, they always came to me." "They still love you," Elena said gently. "That doesn't change, because I'm here too. You don't have to be the only one who keeps them safe anymore, Wren. That's allowed to be a relief, not a loss." Wren's eyes glistened suspiciously, and for a moment Elena thought the girl might finally let herself cry, might finally release some of the weight she had been carrying alone for 3 long years. But Wren simply nodded, blinking hard, and changed the subject, though something in the air between them had shifted, softened, in a way that felt permanent. That evening, Damien returned home earlier than usual, and Elena noticed immediately that something weighed heavily on his mind. "My scouts sent word," he said, once the children were occupied elsewhere, and they had a moment of privacy in the study. They have not yet found definitive proof, but there are strong signs the real leak came from within the Ashwood Pack's own inner circle. Someone with access to sensitive information who had reason to want you blamed instead. Elena asked, her heart pounding. Not yet with certainty, Damien said. But the name that keeps surfacing is a woman named Corin Ashby. I understand she held some rivalry with you before your exile. Elena's stomach twisted. Corin had been a childhood acquaintance, someone Elena had once considered close, though their friendship had soured years ago over a dispute that Elena had never fully understood. She always resented me, Elena admitted slowly. I didn't realize how much. My scouts will continue gathering proof, Damien said. But I wanted you to know we are close. Whatever it takes, Elena. I intend to see your name cleared properly, not simply hidden away behind my protection. Elena felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her, and without entirely deciding to do it, she reached out and took Damien's hand in both of hers. Thank you, she said, for believing me, for all of this. Damien's fingers curled around hers, warm and steady, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, simply standing together in the quiet study, the fire crackling softly beside them. I should tell you something else, Damien said finally, his voice quieter than usual. It has been 3 years since I felt anything close to what I feel standing here with you. I did not expect it. I am not sure I am ready for it. But I did not want to keep pretending I did not notice it either. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, the honesty in his words settling over her like something both frightening and wonderful all at once. I feel it too, she admitted quietly. I told myself it was nothing, that I was simply grateful for shelter and safety. But it's more than that, isn't it? I believe it is, Damien said. Neither of them moved to close the distance between them that night, both too aware of the danger still hanging over Elena's head, both unwilling to build something fragile on top of uncertainty. But something had shifted between them all the same, an understanding settling quietly into place, waiting for the right moment to grow into something neither of them was willing to name just yet. Over the following days, the household continued its slow, steady healing. Tobias began offering small drawings more frequently, each one a little more detailed than the last, small proof of a boy slowly finding his way back toward connection. Ren started asking to help with the younger children instead of taking over entirely, learning, bit by bit, that she was allowed to simply be a child herself sometimes. And the twins, secure in the consistency Elena provided, grew calmer, their fights shorter, their laughter more frequent. Damien, too, seemed changed. He made more time for his children, joining them for meals more often, sitting through clumsy board games with genuine effort, even managing, on one memorable evening, to coax a full laugh out of Tobias during a game of hide-and-seek that ended with the boy accidentally revealing his hiding spot behind the curtains by giggling too loudly to stay quiet. Elena watched all of it with a full heart, aware that she had somehow, without quite meaning to, become woven into the fabric of this family in a way she had never expected when she climbed that fence in the storm weeks ago. She did not know yet how the danger from her past would resolve, or what shape her future with this family might eventually take. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she did not want to imagine a version of her life that did not include this house, these children, and the quiet, steady man who had offered her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. The peace that had settled over the Cade estate did not last uninterrupted for long. Nearly 3 weeks after the confrontation with the Ashwood messenger, Damien's scouts returned with news that changed the shape of everything. Elena was in the garden with the children, watching Ren teach Ivy how to properly braid a crown of small wildflowers, when a guard approached and asked her to come to the study at once. Something in his tone told her this was different from the last summons, less urgent panic and more grave certainty. She found Damien waiting with 2 scouts she recognized from the household staff, both looking travel-worn but satisfied, the way people looked when a difficult task had finally been completed. "We have proof," Damien said, the moment Elena entered, gesturing to a folder of documents laid out across his desk. Corin Ashby's own correspondence, obtained through proper channels, detailing her communication with the rival pack that received the leaked information. She acted alone, out of old resentment toward you, and framed you deliberately, to escape suspicion herself. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the documents, scanning the careful handwriting, the dates, the details that matched precisely with the accusations that had once been leveled against her. Relief crashed over her so suddenly that her knees nearly buckled, and Damien moved quickly to steady her, his hand warm and firm against her arm. "It's real," Elena whispered, staring at the proof of her own innocence laid bare after weeks of carrying the weight of a lie. "After everything, it's actually real." "It is," Damien confirmed, "and it will be presented to the Ashwood Pack leadership, along with a formal demand that your name be cleared publicly and Corin Ashby held accountable for her actions." Word of the discovery spread through the estate quickly, and that evening, Elena found herself surrounded by all 4 children, each of them reacting in their own particular way to the news that the shadow hanging over their new guardian had finally begun to lift. Ren, usually so guarded with her emotions, hugged Elena tightly, an embrace that lasted long enough to communicate everything the girl still struggled to say in words. Ivy and Milo danced around the room in an impromptu celebration, more excited by the general festive mood than by any real understanding of what had happened. And Tobias, quiet as always, simply climbed into Elena's lap and stayed there, his small body relaxed against hers, in a way that spoke of trust built slowly and carefully over the past weeks. But the resolution of one danger did not mean the end of every threat. Word soon reached the estate that the Ashwood Pack, humiliated by the exposure of Corin's betrayal within their own ranks, had grown volatile, some members refusing to accept the proof, insisting instead that Elena had somehow manipulated the evidence with the help of Alpha Cade's influence. "They will not simply accept this quietly," Damien warned Elena one evening, as they walked together along the edge of the estate's grounds, the setting sun painting the sky in deep shades of orange and gold. "Pride runs deep in old packs. Some of them would rather believe a conspiracy than admit their own leadership failed to protect an innocent member of their pack." "What does that mean for us?" Elena asked, careful with the word us, though she noticed Damien did not correct her use of it. "It means they may attempt to reclaim what they see as unfinished business," Damien said grimly. "I do not intend to let that happen. But I want you to understand the risk clearly, Elena. Standing beside me, standing with this family, may draw further danger toward you before it fully resolves." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him fully, her expression steady, despite the fear curling in her stomach at his words. "I have spent my whole life running from danger that wasn't even my fault," she said. "I am tired of running, Damien. If there is still a fight ahead, I would rather face it here, with people who believe in me, than alone in some forest, with nothing but exhaustion and fear for company." Something fierce and proud flickered behind Damien's dark eyes at her words, and he reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. "You are not the frightened woman who climbed my fence in a storm anymore," he said quietly. "No," Elena agreed, leaning slightly into his touch. "I don't think I am." The tension between them, simmering quietly for weeks, finally found its release in that golden evening light. Damien closed the remaining distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, but Elena did not move away. When his lips finally met hers, gentle and searching, she felt 3 years of his guarded grief and weeks of her own accumulated fear simply dissolve into something warm and certain, a promise neither of them needed to speak aloud, because it lived entirely in the quiet, careful way he held her. When they finally parted, Damien rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly unsteady. "I did not expect this," he admitted. "Not when I offered you shelter that first night. I only wanted my children to have someone steady in their lives again." "And now?" Elena asked softly. "Now I find that I want the same steadiness for myself," Damien said. "If you will have it. If you will have me, despite everything still unresolved, despite the danger that may still be waiting." Elena thought of the 11 guardians who had come before her, each one eventually driven away by grief and chaos and difficulty. She thought of her own long history of being cast aside the moment she became inconvenient. And she thought of the quiet, steady weeks that had passed in this house, the drawings pinned above her bed, the small victories with Ren and the twins, the warmth that had grown slowly and steadily between herself and the tired, guarded man standing before her now. "I will have you," she said simply. "Whatever comes next, I would rather face it standing beside you than running from it alone." They stood together in the fading evening light for a long while after that, the estate quiet and peaceful around them, unaware that the danger Damien had warned of was already beginning to stir, closer than either of them yet realized, gathering itself in the shadows of the Ashwood territory, waiting for the right moment to strike at the fragile happiness they had only just begun to build. The attack came on a night no one had expected, quiet and sudden, the way real danger so often was, without the warning of thunder or storm to announce its arrival. It began with the estate's alarm bells, a deep, resonant tolling that Elena had never heard before, but understood instantly to mean trouble. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, and within seconds Damien was at her door, already dressed, his expression carved from grim urgency. "Stay with the children," he said. "Lock the nursery door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Greta." "Do you understand?" "What's happening?" Elena asked, already pulling on a robe and following him into the hallway. "Scouts spotted movement at the eastern border," Damien said. "Ashwood colors. I do not yet know their intentions, but I will not take chances with my family's safety." Elena's blood ran cold at the word family, spoken so naturally, so instinctively including her within its meaning even in the chaos of the moment. She did not have time to dwell on it. She hurried to the children's rooms, gathering a groggy, frightened Ren, the twins clinging sleepily to each other, and Tobias, who woke with wide, frightened eyes but did not cry out, simply reaching for Elena's hand and holding tight. She herded them into the nursery, the sturdiest room in that wing of the house, and locked the door behind them just as Damien had instructed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the sounds of guards moving through the halls below, shouted commands, the distant clash of something that might have been a confrontation at the property's edge. "Is it them?" Ren asked quietly, her voice steady despite the fear visible in her eyes. "The people who wanted to take you away?" "I think so," Elena admitted, seeing no point in lying to a child who had already learned far too much about danger in her short life. "But your father is going to make sure we're safe. All of us." She gathered the children close, humming softly to keep the twins calm, and pressed a steady, reassuring hand against Tobias's back as he trembled silently against her side. Ren, despite her own obvious fear, helped keep watch at the door, her young face set with the same fierce determination Elena had seen in her from their very first meeting. The wait stretched on for what felt like hours, though Elena suspected it was closer to 30 tense minutes, the sounds of conflict outside gradually growing quieter, then fading entirely into a heavy, uncertain silence. Finally, a familiar knock sounded at the door. 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, the signal Damien had given her before he left. Elena rushed to unlock it, and found him standing in the hallway, slightly disheveled but unharmed, relief washing visibly over his features the moment he saw her and the children safe behind her. "It's over," he said. A small group attempted to cross onto the property, likely intending to reclaim Elena by force despite the evidence already cleared against her. My guards intercepted them at the border before they reached the house. No one from our side was seriously harmed. "And them?" Elena asked. "Detained," Damien said. "They will be dealt with through proper channels, and I intend to send a clear message to what remains of the Ashwood leadership that further attempts at aggression against this household will not be tolerated." The children rushed to their father, and Damien knelt to gather all 4 of them into his arms at once, holding them tightly, his composed authority cracking just slightly to reveal the depth of relief and love beneath it. Elena watched the scene with tears gathering in her own eyes, moved by the sight of this family, still healing, still finding its way back to wholeness, drawing even closer together in the face of danger, rather than being torn apart by it. In the days that followed, Damien made good on his promise. He called for a formal gathering of regional alpha leaders, presenting the full evidence of Elena's innocence, alongside the failed attempt to seize her by force, and demanded that the Ashwood pack formally and publicly clear her name, with consequences for any further aggression made explicit and severe. The gathering was tense, filled with old pride and reluctant admissions, but in the end, faced with undeniable proof and the clear backing of the most powerful alpha in the region, the Ashwood leadership had no choice but to comply. Elena's name was cleared before witnesses from every major pack in the territory, her innocence declared beyond doubt, and Corin Ashby, the true source of the betrayal that had cost Elena everything, was formally exiled from her own pack, in a bitter twist of justice finally served. Elena stood beside Damien throughout the proceedings, her chin held high, no longer the frightened, exhausted woman who had once climbed a fence in a storm with nothing left to lose. She had a name again, a reputation restored, and something she had not truly had in a very long time, a place and people that were unmistakably hers. That evening, back at the estate, the household celebrated quietly, a simple dinner, shared together as a family, the children laughing freely, Damien's guarded composure finally, fully relaxed for the first time in longer than Elena had known him. It was not a grand celebration, no elaborate feast or ceremony, but it felt, to Elena, more meaningful than anything she could have imagined weeks ago, when she first arrived at this house, with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a desperate hope for shelter. After the children were finally settled for the night, worn out from the day's excitement, Elena found Damien on the balcony, where they had once stood together during her sleepless nights of worry, the same spot where he had first admitted his growing feelings for her weeks ago. "It's really over," Elena said softly, joining him at the railing. "The danger is over," Damien corrected gently, "but I hope what has grown between us, and between you and my children, is only just beginning." Elena smiled, leaning into his side as his arm wrapped naturally around her shoulders, the warmth of his presence a comfort she had come to rely on, more deeply than she had ever expected to allow herself. "I hope so too," she said. They stood together beneath the quiet night sky, the danger of her past finally laid to rest, the fragile beginnings of a new future stretching ahead of them, uncertain in its details but steady in its foundation, built slowly and carefully out of trust, earned rather than promised, out of patience rather than grand gestures, out of a family healing together, one small moment at a time. Autumn settled over the Cade estate, painting the surrounding forest in shades of amber and rust, and with it came a season of quiet, steady healing that Elena had once believed impossible for a house that had carried so much grief for so long. Life had found a gentler rhythm since the danger from the Ashwood pack had finally passed. Damien's duties as alpha continued, disputes and negotiations still pulling at his time, but he made a visible effort now to return home, before evening, whenever he could, and when he could not, he made certain to explain why, rather than simply leaving his children to wonder and worry as he once had. Elena noticed the change most clearly in Ren, who had begun, slowly and carefully, to let go of the fierce independence she had clung to for 3 long years. She still checked on her younger siblings out of habit, still hovered nearby when Ivy or Milo seemed upset, but she no longer carried the weight of their entire well-being on her own small shoulders. She had started asking to spend afternoons simply being a child again, requesting trips into the nearby village to see other children her age, asking Elena to teach her small things, how to braid more complicated patterns into hair, how to identify different birds by their calls in the surrounding woods. The twins had grown steadier too, their chaotic energy now channeled into genuine curiosity, rather than desperate attempts to test whether anyone would notice or care. Ivy had developed a fondness for drawing alongside Tobias. The two of them often found sprawled on the playroom floor together, sharing colored pencils and comparing their pictures with serious, focused concentration. Milo had taken an interest in the estate's stable, spending hours watching the grooms care for the horses, occasionally daring to ask Elena if he might learn to ride properly once he was a little older. And Tobias, quiet, careful Tobias, continued his slow journey back toward the world, one small step at a time. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, unremarkable in every way except for what it became. Elena was reading aloud to the children in the sitting room, a story about a lost fox finding its way home through a great forest, when Tobias, curled up close beside her on the couch, suddenly spoke. "Read it again," he said. The room fell utterly silent. Ren's head snapped up from her own book, Ivy and Milo froze mid-argument over a toy, and Elena's heart nearly stopped in her chest, certain for a moment that she had imagined the small, clear voice breaking a silence that had lasted for 3 long years. "Tobias," she said carefully, not wanting to startle him, not wanting to make too much of the moment and frighten him back into silence. He looked up at her, his small face solemn but certain. "The fox story," he said. "Read it again." Elena's eyes filled with tears she could not hold back, and she gathered him gently into her arms, holding him close as the rest of the room erupted into stunned, joyful chaos. Ren rushing to hug her brother, the twins bouncing excitedly around the couch, all of them talking at once, asking Tobias questions he did not yet have the words to answer, but which he seemed, for the first time in years, willing to try. Damien arrived home that evening to find his household in a state of overwhelming joy, and when Elena told him what had happened, when Tobias himself, shy but determined, looked up at his father and said his name aloud for the very first time in 3 years, Damien's composed strength finally broke entirely. He knelt in front of his youngest son and pulled him into an embrace so full of relief and love that even Ren, usually so careful with her own emotions, found herself crying openly at the sight. "Thank you," Damien said to Elena later that night, once the children were finally settled, still glowing from the day's miracle. "I do not know how you did what 11 others could not, but I will spend the rest of my life grateful that you did." "I didn't do anything special," Elena said honestly. "I just gave him time, patience, the certainty that I wasn't going anywhere, whether he spoke or not." "That is not nothing," Damien said firmly. "That is everything. You gave my son back his voice by giving him something he had lost the moment his mother died, the belief that someone would stay long enough to be worth trusting." Elena leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the weight of the day's joy. "I love them," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she had fully decided to say them aloud. "All 4 of them, more than I ever expected to love children who weren't my own." Damien turned to look at her, something deep and certain settling behind his dark eyes. "They love you too," he said, "and I love you, Elena. I have for weeks now, though I have been careful not to say it too soon, too fast, while so much still hung unresolved around us." "Nothing hangs unresolved now," Elena said softly, her heart full to bursting. "My name is cleared. Your children are healing. There's nothing standing between us anymore, is there?" "No," Damien said, drawing her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "There is nothing left standing between us at all." He kissed her then, slow and certain, a promise built not on the desperation of a storm-swept night months ago, but on weeks and months of steady trust, of small victories witnessed and shared, of a family rebuilding itself piece by careful piece, around a woman who had once believed she had nowhere left in the world to belong. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the trees surrounding the estate, and inside, in a house that had finally remembered how to be warm, 4 children slept soundly, secure for the first time in years, in the knowledge that the person caring for them was not going anywhere at all. The peace that had settled so warmly over the Cade household was tested once more as winter approached, though this time the danger came wrapped in the formal, careful language of pack politics rather than the raw chaos of a storm or a border skirmish. It began with a letter, delivered by formal courier, and marked with a seal Elena did not recognize, though Damien's expression darkened the moment he saw it. "Alpha Ren Calder," he explained grimly, once he had read the contents. "Leader of the Northern Territory bordering our own. He has requested a formal audience, citing concerns over what he calls instability within my household." "Instability?" Elena repeated, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "He means you," Damien said bluntly. "Word has spread of my intentions toward you, and Ren has never missed an opportunity to challenge my authority when he believes he has found a weakness to exploit. He will argue that taking an outsider, one recently embroiled in scandal with the Ashwood pack, as my mate makes me vulnerable, and therefore makes this territory vulnerable." Elena felt the old familiar fear rising in her chest, the sense that once again her presence was about to become a liability for people she cared about. "Maybe I should step back from the audience," she said quietly. "Let you handle this without giving him more reason to." "No," Damien said firmly, taking her hands in his. "I will not hide you away, as if you are something to be ashamed of. You are not a weakness, Elena. You are the reason my children speak, and laugh, and trust again. If Ren Calder wishes to challenge that, he will have to do so to my face, with you standing beside me." The audience was set for a week later, to be held in the great hall of the Cade estate before witnesses from several regional packs, a formal, tense affair that Elena approached with her heart hammering, despite Damien's steady reassurance at her side. Alpha Ren Calder arrived with an entourage of his own guards, a tall, sharp-featured man whose confidence carried an edge of arrogance that set Elena on guard the moment he entered the hall. "Alpha Cade," Ren said, his tone smooth but pointed. I trust you understand my concern is not personal. A territory as significant as yours requires stability at its head. Taking a mate so recently, at the center of scandal, however resolved on paper, raises questions among your allies. My allies have seen the evidence themselves, Damien replied evenly. Elena Marsh's innocence was proven before witnesses from every pack in this region, including your own scouts, if I recall correctly. Proof of innocence does not erase the disruption such scandal brings, Wren pressed. Nor does it address the deeper question of whether an unmated woman, with no strong pack lineage behind her, is fit to stand beside an alpha king, to one day help guide the future of this territory's leadership. Elena felt heat rise in her chest at the insult, but she held her composure, standing tall beside Damien, exactly as she had promised herself she would. It was Wren, unexpectedly, who broke the tense silence that followed, stepping forward from where the children had been permitted to observe the proceedings, her young voice carrying clearly across the hall. She healed us, Wren said, her chin lifted with the same fierce bravery Elena had admired from their very first meeting. 11 guardians came through our house, and none of them could reach my brother, when he stopped talking after our mother died. Elena did, in a few weeks. If that's not fit to help lead a territory, I don't know what is. A ripple of surprised murmurs passed through the assembled witnesses at the child's bold interruption, and Elena's heart swelled with pride and love, so fierce it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Damien placed a steadying hand on his daughter's shoulder, silent but proud, before turning back to address Wren Calder directly. My daughter speaks the truth more plainly than diplomacy usually allows, Damien said, but she is not wrong. Elena Marsh has done more for the stability and well-being of this household in a few short months than any of us managed in 3 years of grief alone. I do not intend to let outdated notions of pack lineage dictate who is worthy of my trust, or my heart. Wren's expression tightened, clearly unprepared for the united front presented against him, both from the alpha himself and from his own children. He glanced around the hall, gauging the mood of the assembled witnesses, many of whom now watched him with open skepticism, rather than the support he had perhaps hoped to find. This is not the end of the conversation, Cade, Wren said finally, though the confidence in his voice had visibly diminished. The regional council will hear of this. Stability matters to more than just yourself. Then let them hear it, Damien said calmly. Let them hear that my children, who suffered more grief in 3 years than most endure in a lifetime, finally found their way back to laughter and speech, because of the woman standing beside me. Let the council decide for themselves what truly threatens stability, and what strengthens it. Wren Calder left the estate that afternoon, with his entourage trailing behind him, his earlier confidence considerably deflated, and though Elena knew his challenge might not be the very last obstacle they would face, she felt, standing in that hall surrounded by a family who had so fiercely defended her, a strength she had never known she possessed. You didn't have to speak up like that, Elena told Wren later that evening, kneeling to look the girl in the eye. That took real courage. You gave me a home again, Wren said simply, her earlier bravado softening into something more vulnerable. It seemed only fair to defend it when it needed defending. Elena pulled the girl into a tight embrace, overwhelmed by the depth of trust that had grown between them since that first guarded, suspicious meeting in the playroom months ago. Behind her, Damien watched with quiet, fierce pride, and Elena understood, with a certainty that settled deep and warm in her chest, that whatever challenges still lay ahead, this family, imperfect and healing and fiercely loyal, would face them together, unwilling to be torn apart by outdated politics or lingering prejudice. That night, after the children were finally settled, Damien found Elena in the study, staring into the fire much as she had on that very first night months ago, though the fear in her expression had long since been replaced by something steadier, more certain. I have a question for you, Damien said, kneeling before her chair, his dark eyes serious and open, in a way that made Elena's breath catch. What is it? She asked softly. Wren Calder questioned whether you were fit to stand beside me as my mate, Damien said. I intend to answer that question properly, before the whole region, in the clearest way I know how. Elena Marsh, will you become my mate, not simply the guardian of my children, but my equal, my partner, standing beside me for the rest of both our lives? Elena's hands trembled as she reached for his, tears gathering in her eyes at the depth of sincerity in his voice, at the memory of everything that had brought them to this moment, from a desperate flight through a storm, to this quiet, certain evening months later. 1,000 times yes. News of the mating ceremony spread quickly across the region, and in the weeks leading up to it, the Cade estate transformed into a place of joyful preparation, a stark and welcome contrast to the quiet grief that had lingered within its walls for so long before Elena's arrival. The children threw themselves into the preparations with an enthusiasm that warmed Elena's heart every single day. Wren took charge of selecting flowers for the ceremony, with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, consulting Elena on every choice, but clearly relishing the responsibility. Ivy and Milo argued cheerfully over which ribbons matched best, their disagreements now good-natured rather than desperate, resolved with laughter rather than tears. And Tobias, who had continued speaking more and more each day since that first miraculous afternoon, insisted on drawing a picture for every guest who would attend, carefully labeling each one with names Elena helped him sound out, proud beyond words of his own small, steady progress. Word of Wren Calder's failed challenge had, as Damien predicted, reached the regional council, and rather than the disapproval Wren had hoped to stir, the council's response had been overwhelmingly supportive of Damien's choice, several members openly praising the transformation witnessed within his household as proof enough of Elena's worthiness. Wren Calder, humiliated by the lack of support for his position, quietly withdrew his objections altogether, choosing not to test his standing further against an alpha, whose territory had so visibly and publicly flourished, under the very changes he had tried to condemn. The ceremony itself was held on a clear winter morning, the estate grounds dusted lightly with snow, sunlight glinting brightly off every surface, as guests from across the region gathered to witness the union of Alpha King Damien Cade and the woman who had once arrived at his gates, with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a desperate hope for shelter. Elena stood at the entrance of the great hall, dressed simply, but beautifully, her heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and overwhelming joy, as she prepared to walk toward the man who had, against every expectation, given her not just a home, but a family, a purpose, and a love she had never dared to imagine finding after everything she had lost. Wren walked ahead of her, scattering flower petals with careful precision, her expression solemn with the importance of her task, though Elena caught the small, proud smile she could not quite hide. The twins followed close behind, Ivy clutching a small basket of ribbons, Milo walking with exaggerated seriousness that made several guests smile fondly at his obvious effort to seem grown up for the occasion, and Tobias, walking hand in hand with Greta, who had become something like a grandmother figure to all 4 children over the months, watched the proceedings with wide, wondering eyes, his small voice occasionally piping up to ask questions that made those nearby laugh softly with affection. When Elena finally reached the front of the hall, Damien's expression held such open, unguarded love that her own eyes filled with tears before the ceremony had even properly begun. He reached for her hands, his voice steady and sure, as he spoke the traditional words of mating before their gathered witnesses, promising loyalty, protection, and partnership for the rest of their lives together. Elena spoke her own vows with equal certainty, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall, as she promised to stand beside him, to love his children as fiercely as her own, to build with him the kind of home she had once believed she would never have the chance to know. When the ceremony concluded and the hall erupted into joyful celebration, the children rushed forward first, wrapping themselves around Elena and Damien in an enthusiastic embrace that drew warm laughter from the assembled guests. Wren, no longer the guarded, suspicious girl who had once demanded to know how long Elena would last, hugged her tightly and whispered, "I'm glad you didn't leave," words that meant more to Elena than any formal vow spoken before witnesses. "I'm glad I didn't either," Elena whispered back, holding the girl close. As the celebration continued, late into the afternoon, Elena found a quiet moment to step outside, onto the same balcony where she and Damien had once stood together, during her most uncertain nights, watching the winter sun begin its slow descent over the estate grounds. Damien joined her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind, both of them content, simply to watch the peaceful scene below, guests mingling happily, children laughing as they played in the light dusting of snow. "Do you remember what I said to you, that very first night?" Damien asked softly. Elena smiled, leaning back against him. You said good. When I told you I had nowhere to go, she said. I thought it was the strangest response I had ever heard. It was the truest thing I had said in 3 years, Damien admitted. I did not know, that night, that the woman standing before me, exhausted and half frozen, would become the very heart of this family. I only knew that something in me recognized something in you, a strength that matched exactly what my children needed. And what you needed too, Elena added gently. And what I needed too, Damien agreed, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. You gave my children their voices back, Elena. You gave this house its warmth back. And somewhere along the way, without either of us quite noticing when it happened, you gave me my own heart back as well. Elena turned in his arms to face him fully, her own heart overflowing with a happiness she had once believed impossible, for someone who had spent so long believing she belonged nowhere at all. I came here with nothing, she said softly. No home, no name that wasn't tangled up in a lie, nothing but the clothes on my back, and a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might finally let me stay. And now? Damien asked, his voice warm with love. Now I have everything, Elena said, smiling through happy tears, as the sound of the children's laughter drifted up from the grounds below. A home, a family, 4 children who call me theirs, and a man who found exactly the right words on the worst night of my life, and turned them into the beginning of the best years of it. Below them, Wren looked up and waved, catching sight of the 2 of them on the balcony, and beside her, Tobias raised his small hand in an equally enthusiastic wave, his voice, once silent for 3 long years, carrying clearly up to them on the winter air.
Papa, Elena, come play with us.
Damien laughed, a full, unguarded sound that Elena had come to treasure more than almost anything else in the world, and together, they made their way down to join the children in the snow, a family healed and whole, built not from a single grand promise, but from countless small moments of patience, trust, and love. Gathered together slowly over the months since a desperate woman had whispered, on a stormy night, that she had nowhere left to go, and an Alpha King had answered simply, "Good, my children need a guardian," never imagining that the guardian he had found would become so much more than that, would become, in every way that truly mattered, home.